This fall, bring the beauty of the Rabbit Room into your own community with House Moot. It's a self-hosted gathering where your living room, church, or backyard becomes a place for shared stories, songs, and sacred conversations. With recorded sessions, recipes, activities, discussion questions, and a gathering guide, we'll set the table for you. All you have to do is bring the guests. Get everything you need to host your own House Moot at rabbitroom.com/housemoot.
A measure of agapic love toward oneself is what can help heal us from striving for superiority, accepting and affirming and rejoicing in that who we are, rather than simply rejoicing in what we have accomplished or done. That kind of distinguishes us from others.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Miroslav Volf is a theologian and professor at Yale Divinity School, where he is the founding director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. He's widely known for his work on reconciliation, forgiveness, and the intersection of faith and public life. He's the author of at least 12 books, including the highly influential Exclusion and Embrace, not to mention I don't know how many articles and quite a few co-authored books. His most recent book is The Cost of Ambition: How Striving to Be Better Than Others Makes Us Worse. In this episode, Dr. Volf and I talk about the difference between striving for excellence and striving for superiority. We talk about the freedom to be found when we stop defining ourselves in terms of our status relative to others. Also, we talk a good bit about Satan. Miroslav Volf, I am so happy and honored to have you on the Habit Podcast.
I'm delighted to join you.
I have read and admired your work for a long time, so thank you for being here. Your new book is The Cost of Ambition: How Striving to Be Better Than Others Makes Us Worse. Can you give us the sort of 90-second version of what this book is about?
I think the subtitle says it probably as precisely as I can in less than 90 seconds.
Okay.
How striving to be better than others makes us worse. And behind it lies the sense that either striving for superiority is something that's part and parcel of human nature and will always be with us. That's simply who humans are, or a kind of conviction that it is a tool that will make us better, that would primarily improve our performance. And part of this second conviction seems to be also right. The question being only whether, what kind of improvement are we talking about, and how to try to distinguish or parse out both improvements and possible, and in my judgment, strong downsides of striving for superiority.
Yeah, the subtitle is striving to be better than others, not striving to be better.
Yeah, that's a really important, for me, that's a really important distinction, and I articulate it in terms of striving for superiority versus striving for excellence. And I think for me, the distinction between the two is the striving for superiority is indexed to the position that the other person, our competitor, always has, whereas striving for excellence, I take to be indexed primarily to some more or less objective good that we are aspiring to achieve. And even when there is not an objective good, we are striving then not so much to be better than somebody else, but to be better than ourselves.
Yeah.
That is to say, we are competing with ourselves. That seems to me, I'm interested in my excellence and how I become better at something, or how I reach some admirable goal, whereas striving for superiority, striving for my improvement obviously is present, but it could be achieved even without my improvement. If a person gets worse, I can still be better, and I've achieved my goal.
Yeah. A few years ago on the same weekend here in Nashville, we had the NFL draft happened here and the Nashville marathon and half marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And the NFL draft, the people in that draft were already, if you were in the draft at all, you were already in the top, I don't know, I'm making this number, 0.5% of people who play football. And yet, if I thought I was going to be the first quarterback picked and I was the third quarterback picked, I feel like a failure. And if I am the last person picked, that's a humiliation. And yet I'm still on the top. I'm a very elite athlete if I'm in the draft at all. And by the way, if I'm the first person picked, now I've got imposter syndrome to deal with, or I've got to make sure, as you said in your book, that nobody catches up to me. And at the same time, in that same weekend, there were people running this marathon and half marathon, 30,000 people, maybe 10 or 20 were hoping to win, and the other 29,990 were just glad to finish and to do a little better than they had done the last time. And I love that contrast between the draft, which depends on establishing your place in the pecking order, and as you said, just trying to be a little bit better than your old self.
Yeah, and in some sense, it also indicates how we can be involved in competition with others. That is to say, and they become a stimulus for our better performance. And I would then say that this is really, as I think your point is, this is really not so much striving for superiority as it is striving to improve, and that's an admirable goal.
Yeah. I wondered before, maybe you can speak to this. Could we have professional sports leagues if nobody felt like they had anything to prove? What would the NFL look like if everybody knew their fathers loved them?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. About that, I think we can be competitive. Even apart from it, and it seems to me one can also have this incredible thirst for excellence, for self-improvement. There are examples also in sports where that is the case. And certainly it's my own case. I had zero doubt that my father loved me, and I had a nanny who think I was absolutely the greatest thing since the foundation of the world. I mean, she was completely wrong, of course, but I had enough affirmation. Nonetheless, I had to, over my lifetime, struggle against striving for superiority and be rediscovering the importance of simply being improving.
Yeah. You mentioned that in the striving for superiority, and I really appreciate that distinction between striving for superiority versus striving for excellence. But you said the person striving for superiority can never find a point of rest.
Yeah.
Because if you get to the top, then you're worried about keeping your place at the top, and the target's always moving, as you said. If the striving for superiority never allows for rest, does striving for excellence allow for rest?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And of course, there are kinds of excellences that we cannot achieve. Example is whatever your faith convictions are. I'm a Christian, and if the model of my behavior is the model of Christ, God incarnate, my ideal is unreachable. It is a stable ideal, but unreachable, and hence striving has no end. So in that sense, I think the two can be very, very similar. Though at the same time, if I see that I am approaching. Nobody is at my heels. I'm not being compared with anybody else, and nobody is ahead to look down on me if I'm striving for excellence. Of course, there are plenty of folks like that, right? But they're condemned in the Christian tradition, right? They're the Pharisees who are boasting at being better than that sinner who is asking for mercy from God.
Yeah, I loved your example of I guess it was Emperor Justinian who, when he built the Hagia Sophia, boasted that he was greater than Solomon. He sort of missed the point.
Yeah. They're totally missing the point. There was a little bit of missing the point also by Solomon himself.
Sure,
there, but
that's a good point. Yeah.
The kings are wont of casting themselves as the superior. But certainly, if you're making a temple to the god who came down and dwelled in a stable and who died on the cross, a kind of striving for superiority seems to me rather misplaced.
Yeah. Where does Sabbath fit in? I mean, you mentioned always pursuing excellence in the example of Christ. Can you talk a little bit about the Sabbath and the rest, the Sabbath rest that's part of that process?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's also one thing. I didn't think of it that way before you asked the question, but maybe that's also one of the difference between striving to be better than others and striving for excellence. Sabbath would seem then, as it is often the case in our work days today, the rest seems to set you back, and so you always have to justify rest by saying, well, it's going to improve your performance, and if it isn't going to improve the performance, what's the point of having Sabbath rest? I think the attitude is very different certainly in the Jewish tradition. Where rest isn't understood simply as well. Let me catch my breath because I can't just keep running. I have to stop. Sometimes even machines need to be turned off at some point. But rather, there is a sense, especially of somebody like Jewish. A Jewish thinker, Abraham Heschel, who wrote this book about Sabbath, when you think that Sabbath is a day at which you enjoy that which is, in which you praise God and rest in the reality of what is and pronounce that which is to be good. And in some ways, you can say that Sabbath is then precisely subverting this absolute fascination and captivity to being superior to others. It looks at what is and celebrates its goodness.
Yeah. You've alluded to the fact that good things do have, on a regular basis, come out of the striving for superiority, and yet it's a moral hazard for the striver. Can you talk through that a little bit?
Sure. So we have in virtually all domains of life today, I think, are organized around striving for superiority. That's the case in academic work, more broadly, not just academic, but educational work. 2-year-olds are already groomed for some achievement in whatever their parents think is really worthy of their efforts, and so it is in virtually all domains of life. And to do that, often competition is invoked. So clearly, there are some advantages of competition, and you can say monetary value of successfully competing and being superior can be significant in sports, say, in particular, but in other domains as well. Reputational value of successful striving for superiority can be very high, as also example of sports shows, or in some domains of arts as well. But the question is, what is the human value? What is the moral value of striving for superiority? And I would want to argue that the moral value is dubious, and that it has also negative effects, also on performance. That it has negative effects of who we are and how we perceive ourselves. And that it is in some ways kind of gratuitous. I think it's more or less justified because we are obsessed with money and fame. Those are our fundamental value. Or we are obsessed also with power, which is to say a different form of superiority. So in this discussion of striving for superiority versus striving for excellence, some of the fundamental questions about what is truly valuable, or to use the terminology that philosopher Charles Taylor used, what is our hypergood, the good that organizes everything that we do? That's what's being here decided, which is to say, the character of who we are as human beings is being decided. So it's not just matter across the same set of values, what has advantage or disadvantage. We are discussing what's fundamentally valuable.
Yeah.
In that sense, I find that discussion really very, very important, certainly from a Christian standpoint.
Yeah, and that hyper good that you mentioned, it seems to me that the ambition and the striving for superiority cuts us off from the goods that really give our life meaning and significance. And
yeah, in many sense, that would be my argument, and more basically, my argument is, I mean, we all to a certain extent strive for superiority. It's very hard not to. Sure. Not to compare yourself, and then you have a sense of wanting to be a better. My question, really fundamental question, is this the overarching good that has come to dominate our lives? Or is it some kind of subsidiary good that we can push down and have other goods thrive, and we together with those other goods? So I would put it more gently toward us, because if I simply say absolute no to any striving for superiority, I'd find myself constantly missing that kind of a mark. So in that sense, that is a kind of part of our, I would say, sinful nature rather than just part of our nature. So, and in that sense, but when it becomes the overarching value, then it devalues all sorts of important goods and makes us kind of silly, though we don't even notice how silly we are. I also give example of a perfectly fine car that I have, and my neighbor buys a much better car next to mine. And whereas before I was satisfied with this car, I could have even, this is a great little car, what's the problem with this? I'm driving it to my work. This is zero problem. It's a fantastic car. And then he parks the car next to me, and I suddenly have it diminished. This car is diminished. How on earth can his better car diminish my car with which I'm satisfied? I just don't understand it. In a sense, it's kind of garbages the goods that we otherwise enjoy, that we can be satisfied with. This unsettles our own sense of who we are and satisfaction with ourselves, inferiorizes whatever is within that sphere of comparison, and we suddenly find ourselves striving for empty kinds of goods, for something to be better than others, which we have not needed and would not, under normal circumstances, need.
Yeah. When I was a teenager, it never occurred to me, I never cared whether I sat in the front seat or the back seat. But when I was with friends and somebody say, I call front seat, suddenly I was unhappy with my situation. Whereas if they had not said that, I would have never cared whether I sat in the front or the back.
Yeah, and in some sense, it shows also how much it is socially constructed goal.
Yeah.
That striving for superiority. It isn't necessarily or it depends on the imagination, not only of my neighbor, but of what more generally, culturally validates certain goods, so that it's valuable to sit in front rather than sitting in the back. And it can flip, right? It's sitting in the back or sitting in front. It's a kind of, its actual value is irrelevant in many ways. It's just that it fits certain kind of culturally accepted idea.
Yeah. You make the point that we tend to think of the striving for superiority as an enactment or an expression of our freedom, when in fact it is a compulsion, even a kind of slavery.
Yeah. So you have it in Milton's Paradise Lost that Eve has a line, but inferior, who is free?
Yeah.
So the sense of inferiority is kind of sense of I've been bound. I'm stuck somewhere out of which I cannot go, and there are those who are above me. And then it can appear that striving for superiority can liberate. And as it turns out, and I think you're exactly right, it becomes a certain kind of compulsion. And it becomes compulsion because it has no end. So that whatever stage you reach, that stage is not stable. Somebody's from below is there to overtake it, and so you're always anxious about it, and you have to push further up until you become the greatest of all times, if that's possible. And even that is unstable.
It is.
Because pretty soon, greatest of all times is no longer the greatest of all times.
Yeah. Augustine, said that in the city of man, princes and nations are ruled by the love of ruling, I think is the way he put it. And that desire to rule is itself, you use the word compulsion. And it's not as free as it seems. Yeah,
you're captive. You're captive to it. And you can see it also, since I invoked Milton, and as you know, I have a whole chapter on Milton, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, who I think is very sophisticated in thinking about these things. But it ends up being compulsion in Satan. You can see how much of a compulsion it is, and how, in many ways, even he is internally divided. He knows that he owes existence to God. Satan knows that gratitude doesn't diminish, that simply saying thank you suffices. Nothing needs to be done. So it's a very light or almost a non-existent burden, and yet he cannot help himself. He's kind of in the grip of this. And he can let go of it his entire life, which is to say, he cannot let go of his sense of inferiority the entire time. Self-loathing is what drives it. Self-loathing until you've reached this point which seems unreachable.
Yeah, it sounds so grand when he says it's better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven, except that it's just kooky talk. It's just not true.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he makes these great speeches, and then you realize by the time this poem's over, he's just made the same speech over and over. He's just in this closed circle that he can't get out of because he's so interested in his own prestige.
And then there's interest to spoil the work of others, and in a sense, that's what in Milton's imagination motivates the entirety of the temptation, and then he seeks to replicate in humans his own tragedy, because he cannot delight in what God has created, because that too diminishes him. Because God did something right, Satan has to unspoil it because he's diminished by whatever God does, and he hasn't done.
Yeah. And there's the simple fact that he can't accept the fact that he's a creature. And I think our
Yeah.
own willingness, not just our willingness, but a rejoicing in our creatureliness is, in many ways, it's an antidote to the striving that you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with it. The kind of sense of also delight in the uniqueness of who we are, the specific character of whom we are. So in some ways, I would say that a measure of agapic love toward oneself is what can help heal us from striving for superiority, accepting and affirming and rejoicing in that who we are, rather than simply rejoicing in what we have accomplished or done. That kind of distinguishes us from others.
Which, by the way, is not a resignation to smallness.
No.
That's not to say,
yeah,
I guess I don't amount to much, and I just have to accept that and get used to it.
The Kierkegaard has a line. I haven't used it in the book. I think it goes something like that. You should love yourself as you love your neighbor when you love him as yourself.
Oh, that's so good. I love it. And I think this receiving our creatureliness, accepting the fact that receiving the fact that we're creatures.
Yeah.
In freeing us from the need to strive for superiority also opens up the possibility of pursuing excellence, because we can say that the Creator did a good thing when he made me.
Yeah, and in many domains, my example, I'm not sure that I mentioned him in the book, but my example is Warren Buffett, who thinks that even in the domain of economy, where striving for superiority seems only in military, it seems to be higher, and in politics. Though I don't know how to compare strivings for superiority in different domains. That's beyond my pay grade. But in the domain where striving superiority is a question of often survival and money, an increase of one's profits, he argues that it's wiser to stay with what one's own good capacities are, rather than always trying to beat others in the domain in which they're working. And correspondingly, he also insists always the most important thing is for you to be today better than you've been yesterday. That's the rule that one should follow in life.
I wasn't expecting Warren Buffett to be our
he's an ally. It's very interesting. I may have a word or two just of criticism in some other domains, but certainly I find it's very interesting. And similarly, also in sports, there are people who also think in those ways. And at least some of the philosophers of sports have told me that's the case. So you can have an absolutely top performance, as Warren Buffett's case and some of the athletes suggest, without striving for superiority. It just takes a little bit of generosity of spirit to achieve that.
Yeah, I love it. I love that idea of living into who I was made and not being too worried about how that compares to anybody else.
Yeah.
And tending to my little patch of ground rather than trying to assess where I fit on the hierarchy.
Oh yeah. That's a very beautiful that's a very beautiful thing. That's exactly what it is, and being able to delight and the certain form of dynamic contentment is what I would describe it. Not being content in a sense that I'm just passive now, but being at one with myself. Whether that's in taking a Sabbath rest or in vigorous activity, which I do, and that's a very beautiful thing, I think, and gives even when I am, when I'm striving there, it gives it a certain sense of at oneness with oneself, which I think is, at least in my experience, one of the most beautiful feelings one can have.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about myself and my standing. I'm there and grateful for what is and enjoying the journey.
Yeah. And ambition requires that somebody outside me affirm, give me a sense of who I am. I mean, again, whether I'm succeeding in my ambition or failing in my ambition, I'm still depending on other people to tell me who I am.
Yes. And they're also, if they tend to be ambitious too, their ambition is going to inflect how they see me.
Yeah. You argue in your book that modern technology, so we've always had a tendency toward ambition, but that modern technology, social media, these sorts of things really, let's say, metastasize a tendency, a malignant tendency has really been metastasized by technology. And then also, furthermore, that leads toward, it's a faster track towards self-loathing. Ambition always points that way. As you said, in Paradise Lost, Satan, for all his big talk, is motivated by self-loathing. But tell me about this idea that I can't decide how I feel about the claim that it's worse than ever.
Yeah. So that's great and fair enough. It's how do you call it? Hypothetical claim, in the sense that I haven't measured it and have no way of measuring it. So this claim, this statement, rests on a kind of two features of modern life. And one feature of modern life is what you've mentioned, the modern technological advances. We see that particularly having particular effect on teenagers who are in the process of stabilizing who they are and their identity, and kind of destroying their lives, because now they can compare themselves not with simply what they see around, but from whatever can come anywhere in the world, and whatever can be not just immediately visible to them, but which can be curated and made to look in a certain kind of way. So in some ways, technology allows people to project themselves as somebody into the space, and then others are being generally compared their own self-image from the mirror, or how they experience themselves with this curated image. And they can curate their own image, but then they know that that's not who they are. So there's this one element where also certain technological capacities are there, but also domain of comparison is extended. Anywhere in the world, I can compare. Comparisons come at me. It's not that my own little village or my own school is a space. The other area is, or the other comment about modern life is, and I think it's equally, even not more important, and that is that we live in quasi-independent systems, educational system. We have this political system and so forth, right? And these systems have been built fundamentally around competition. Education is a very good example. And it's not just I'm sitting in the classroom and I'm competing with my friend, right? Who's going to get more better grades? That's been always there. But now I'm inserted in a situation where my grades depends what high school I'm going to go, or if not high school, what kind of scholarship I'm going to get to go to the college, and then I'm going to be inserted into competitive kinds of a market. I'm not going to become shoemaker like my father was a shoemaker, or whatever else it is that I was doing. So in that sense, it seems to me that it is much more widespread, and in some ways much more intense. Even though during my lifetime, it seems to me that education, it has become more intense, the competition.
Yeah.
And comparisons are more significant, and marginal differences matter a great deal. And it's to the point that it's kind of insanity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we have so many metrics, so many ways to quantify how when I was in school, I could wonder if I was popular or not. Now I can see a number. I can see how many likes how many friends I have on the social media and how many likes I get.
Well, have you seen this? Talking about that, I've just seen recently the episode of Black Mirror.
I'm so afraid to watch that show. I cannot bring myself to watch it.
Oh, it's very pessimistic, dystopian kind of show. So I don't recommend it for everyone. But it can be very interesting. And then one episode is basically about this the same phenomenon that you described. You're being assessed, but now every person you pass by, you can assess them, and that's registered in some common space, and then that's beamed back. You can always see what number you have in all the interactions, and it just makes everything that you do filtered through your standing and your fake from throughout all of your interaction. You can't be yourself. Yeah. You have always to project an image, and an image that somebody else would like, and whoever that somebody else is. Or you can imagine the worst scenario where a government does that, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody's assessing. Government has also way of monitoring you and then assessing what you're doing. Suddenly you have this number that is either in the hands of a nasty authoritarian government, or that's in the hands of equally nasty people who all want to beat you in this number that you have. You see.
Well, as you said, there's no, in that scenario, there's no room for me to be honest about who I am, and no
room for grace.
No room for grace. No room for if my score, the fact that my real self can't be scored or won't be scored tells me that I can't be loved.
Yeah, exactly.
You talk about the fact that this kind of striving always leads to fudging the truth. Whether it's whether that comes down to my failure to acknowledge that my successes I actually owe a lot to other people, whatever I succeed at.
Yeah.
Or also, as you said, to be dishonest to gain a competitive advantage. And so there's no room for honesty, for being real. We've mentioned Paradise Lost and Satan a few times. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that Satan lied so much in Paradise Lost that it was never clear whether he was lying or whether he was a lie. And Satan never knew whether he was telling the truth or not.
Right.
That sounds a lot like when I get, into the whirlhole of ambition. That sounds a lot like that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, your self-image is dependent on you believing your own lie.
Yeah.
And we are in a tailspin when that happens.
Yeah. Okay, we need to be sort of moving this toward a conclusion. So let me ask you. You've touched on this, but I'd like to hear you sort of crystallize it. How does one escape from this trap of striving for superiority?
Yeah. So a lot of it depends on how much we let the opinion of others or the kind of value system which favors these kinds of distinction dominate our own imagination. So it seems to me that's one of the important things. The other, I think we touched briefly on it, which I think is particularly important, and that is what sometimes in theology is called distinction between person and work, between who I am as an individual, as a human being created in God's image, and how do I perform and what I do in the world. There is I think in theological sense, very important distinction. I am not some of my deeds, some of what others have done to me, what I've done with what others have done to me, whether what they have done to me is thought of me or actually exerted some kind of effects upon me. That's not who I am. And if that's true, then the source of my identity lies in the very fact of my being created in the image of God, rather than from anything that I have achieved or failed to achieve. And it seems to me if we have this kind of sense, which is, I think, the basic premise of Paul's account of justification by grace, by faith and grace, you are justified, you are set in right by the sheer gift that you are receiving, and not by anything that you do. And I find that an immensely liberating thing. And then I think that sets us for the third thing, that sets us well to be in the position of having this acceptance of oneself. This, if you, as I put it, agapic love for oneself. Just as I love the other person, irrespective of what they have or have not done, or just as God loves us, irrespective of that, so I can love myself. That frees me again from compulsion to become or turn myself into something, and by that very act betray who I actually am.
Yeah, I find it helpful to remember that I exist because God thought I was a good idea.
Yeah, so my daughter was always fond when she was really, really tiny. She was always fond. She asked, "Where was I before I came to you?" And so you were in the mind of God, and she grasped on this thing and held it so beautifully. And so I think that's quite right.
Yeah. All right, last question. Who are the writers that make you want to write?
I can give you names. Is names what you want, or you want?
Names is what I want, yes.
Names is what you want. Oh,
I want a reading list.
Some of the folks are, yeah. So Nietzsche makes me want to write, stimulates me in a certain ways. Martin Luther does.
I'm sorry, can you back up? Can you say more about why Nietzsche makes you want to write?
He's always surprising, sees the world very differently than I do, and maybe I should say what makes me want to write is a kind of writing that makes me think, and makes me think in a kind of existentially significant ways, that calls into question, affirms something fundamental about who I am, and how I ought to be in the world. And I think Nietzsche does that in a very significant way and unsparingly, and a beautiful, really prose. So he has accompanied me for 30 years. I've read regularly his work. I'm also taken by now very different and profoundly Christian. Martin Luther has functioned for me in this way. Certainly Augustine, when I read him, does that too. So those who move me, they also make me want to write. Dostoevsky, for instance, in more recent writers. Marilyn Robinson, I love reading. My own colleague and very good friend, Chris Wyman, some of his essays are always startling and they kind of pushed me to write. And actually, he and I are just publishing, have had correspondence, and are just publishing that correspondence. Harper is bringing it out.
Really?
In January.
I did not know that. I will be reading that book.
Yeah. So yeah, those would be some of the
great.
people. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Miroslav Volf. What a pleasure this has been. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, and it was wonderful to have a conversation with you. These are some of the best things that we can have. We have conversations about things that matter. Yeah. I enjoyed whether I'd written a book or not. The conversation is important.
Yes, thanks. The Habit Podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. You can support their work, including this podcast, by becoming a member. Visit rabbitroom.com/membership. Special thanks as well to Taylor Leonard for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorleonard.com. The Habit Membership is a library of resources for writers by me, Jonathan Rogers. More importantly, The Habit is a hub of community where like-minded writers gather to discuss their work and give each other a little more courage. Find out more at thehabit.co.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.